Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the channel where you see every single mistake I make, which happens more often than I care to admit. But anyway, we're getting really close. I just got the fuel tank completely installed. It's all plumbed back there. I still need to figure out how to power the pump, but I have all the wires run to it right here, so hopefully I can figure that out up here. If not, I'm gonna have to drop the tank again. I really don't want to drop the tank because I've now put 4 gallons of diesel fuel in it. But anyway, assuming I can figure that out, I need to went ahead and put that on this morning. I shouldn't have done that. I need to figure out the pigtail for the fuel cutoff solenoid. I need to figure out which one's the primary and which one's the secondary. And once that's done, I just need to plumb the return and the supply line. And if I have the fuel shut-off solenoid wired and the fuel pump pumping, or sorry, the lift pump. It's a lift pump, not a fuel pump. If I have the lift pump pumping, this very well could run this weekend. But y'all know how that goes. So, time lapse.
So the first thing I did was hook a return line to the end of the injectors. Next, I turned my attention to the bracket that holds the TV cable for the AW4. It doesn't like to hold all the way and will wiggle loose, so I modified the bracket so the cable would stay secure. With the bracket successfully modified, I reconnected the throttle cable to the Kubota V2403. See the arrows that are pointing to a cable? Yeah, that's the charging wire for the alternator laying against the exhaust manifold. And this is where I tried burning down the shop. I hadn't even realized I grabbed the GoPro and ran away from it. With the ground removed from the battery, I removed the damaged charging wire from the main wiring harness.
So here's what just happened. I haven't watched the footage. I don't know how good it came out. I went to test the fuel shut-off solenoid, and I made a really bad mistake. Hooked up the battery. This, especially that, like that. This is the charging wire for the alternator. Now, every time I've hooked up the battery, I made sure this was off the side of the Jeep, nowhere near any of the metal. Did I do that this morning? No. This was actually laying against the exhaust manifold. So even though when I first hooked up the battery, nothing happened, the second I hit the wires on the shut-off solenoid, it was like, boom, instant smoke. It smells terrible in here. And that was the result. So yeah. To the people that know me really well, I've never had a lot of luck with electricity. And that was admittedly my own mistake. So, back to work.
I then cut off the damaged piece of section off the main battery cable and reconnected it to the main relay box in the engine bay of the Wrangler. I then proceeded to figure out the wiring for the fuel shut-off solenoid. I had to enlist the help of my wife to figure out some of the wiring, so I installed the driver's seat so she'd have something comfortable to sit on. With my wife turning the key between run and start, I started probing the wiring harness in the engine bay to try to find a wire that was active while it was both in run and start. Once I found a wire that would work, I proceeded to cut the connector off the old wiring harness I had already cut up. I'd be using this wire to energize the hold pin on the fuel shutoff solenoid. Here I'm scavenging some wires out of the old wiring harness that I need so I can hook up the fuel shutoff solenoid. Next, I remove the wire that activates the starter solenoid, and the reason for this is I'm also going to wire in the main fuel shutoff solenoid wire to it. The logic behind this is that the only time I activate the fuel shutoff solenoid is when I'm trying to start the engine. With a connector installed on the wire, I reattach it to the starter solenoid. Now I'm wrapping up all the wiring by connecting the wires to the wiring pigtail that's already connected to the fuel shutoff solenoid. I am using heat shrink connectors that I will shrink once I know everything works later on. I started to heat shrink the connectors, but then my lighter ran out of fuel. Next, I connected the return hose to the 5/16 hard line that went back to the lift pump. With the return line taken care of, I then turned my attention to hooking up a supply line to the mechanical lift pump on the side of the Kubota V2403. And then I took that same hose and connected it to the 3/8 hard line going all the way back to the lift pump. I then spent the next several hours trying to figure out how to get power to the lift pump.
Okay, good morning. It's now Sunday. Everything's there for this to run. I'm literally just fighting getting power to the lift pump. And I have a way where I could get it running, but I kind of want to keep the wiring harness that's left intact as much as possible. So there are times that you need to step away and just ask for help, and that's what I did. So last night I posted online on one of my favorite forums, the Wrangler TJ forum, and I said, look, is there a way to bypass the ASD? I found one guy that was able to make more heads and tails of the wiring diagram than I was late last night. And yeah, I've got a few things I'm going to try. So if that works and we can get power to the lift pump, we might be running today. Time lapse.
I tested the fix that was suggested to me on the Wrangler TJ forum, and it turned out once I grounded one wire on one of the relays, the lift pump finally turned on. Then it was the case of just pulling out as much of the ground wire as humanly possible and grounding it to the chassis of the Wrangler. I already had a wire that was grounded underneath of this bolt, so I decided to undo the bolt and put a connector on it, both with this ground wire and the other one from the relay, to secure it correctly back to the chassis of the Wrangler. Next, I needed to extend the ground wire from the lift pump all the way to the front of the Wrangler. Again, I'm not cleaning up any of the wiring right now because I need to make sure I can get the Kubota V2403 running before I permanently enclose all the wiring. With the ground wire extended, I then just connected to the negative terminal of the battery. I then checked the transmission fluid level to make sure there's enough fluid in the pan. Next, I reattached the main power wire to the starter. I had noticed earlier that the throttle wasn't all the way seated back into the idle position, so I extended the rod just a little bit so the throttle lever would have full range of motion. Lastly, I filled up the radiator with some fresh coolant.
Fire in the hole!
While I haven't shown it, I did try starting the motor several times with no success, so I eventually decided to try bypassing the mechanical lift pump on the side of the Kubota V2403.
Okay, I have bypassed the mechanical lift pump that's on the side of the V2403 and hooked the supply line directly to the injection pump, which I kind of know works because I did this on my D1503. So Fingers crossed. See if we can get it to start. Let a little air bleed out. Man! Oh, that was exciting. You know, on second thought, I should open the shop. Now, if I get it running, I'm going to let it idle for like 2 or 3 seconds and turn the key off because I want to make sure that my fuel cutoff solenoid works. This is dumb exciting. Yes! Oh my goodness. Okay, so the cheap Chinese lift pump that I bought 18 months ago, the mechanical lift pump that I installed off of eBay, went bad. Shocker. So I just bypassed it. It works. I got a crap ton of work to do. But it runs! It runs good!